Northwood Elementary, Monday morning. The pine trees behind Northwood Elementary whispered in the early breeze, their branches swaying just enough to scatter cones across the playground pavement. The air carried that familiar late autumn crispness, a scent of dry leaves and cold iron, quiet, patient, waiting for winter. Lieutenant Nathan Cole stood with arms crossed near the corner of the fence line, watching the students as they filed out for recess. His gray Northwood security windbreaker fluttered slightly, the badge patch on his sleeve catching the sun. A thermos of lukewarm coffee steamed at his feet. Untouched. He didn't smile much. He didn't need to. Beside him sat Orion. The Belgian Malinois was lean, dark-coated with sharp, intelligent eyes. Even in retirement, his posture was flawless, ears high, head alert, scanning with the same calm intensity he'd shown back when both he and Nathan had worn green instead of gray. The kids mostly kept their distance. They'd been told Orion was a working dog, which in elementary school language meant, don't pet unless invited. Still, they often glanced at him in awe as they passed. He never barked, never chased, never wagged unnecessarily. He simply watched. Until that morning, Nathan took a sip of coffee just as Orion stood up. It wasn't abrupt, no sudden noise, no obvious trigger. The dog simply stood, turned, and walked across the field. Nathan followed his gaze, at first seeing nothing out of the ordinary. Groups of kids clustering by the swings, shouting over dodgeball rules, laughter from the jungle gym. A teacher scribbling notes under the awning. Then he saw her, Lily Hart. She sat alone on the edge of the sandbox, arms wrapped around her knees. Her jacket zipped up all the way to her chin. Auburn bangs hung over her eyes. Her shoes were caked with old mud, and she was turned slightly away from the others. She didn't look up until Orion reached her. The dog slowed his steps as he approached, as if not to startle. Then, without hesitation, he sat down right next to her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Lily didn't flinch, didn't speak, but slowly, carefully, she turned her head. Her eyes met his, and she smiled. Barely, just a flicker, but Nathan noticed from across the yard, because it was the first time she'd smiled at anything, or anyone, in weeks. He approached slowly, hands in his jacket pockets. "You all right, Lily?" he asked, his voice gravel smooth but gentle. She looked up at him, blinked once, then nodded. Orion remained completely still. Nathan crouched. Orion doesn't usually pick favorites. Did he say something funny? Lily shrugged. He just came. Nathan studied her for a second. Her voice was soft, flat, like something in her had been pressed too tightly for too long. He glanced at Orion. The dog blinked slowly, but his ears didn't twitch. He wasn't going anywhere. After recess, Nathan called the office, not to raise alarm, just to ask a question. "Has Lily Hart been acting any different lately?" The secretary sighed. "She's very quiet, doesn't participate much, no behavioral issues, though. She's living with her uncle now. Parents not in the picture." "Uncle?" "Raymond Hart. He brought her enrollment paperwork 4 weeks ago. Pretty blunt guy. Said he's her legal guardian after some family disruptions. Didn't elaborate. Nathan didn't press further. But his guts stirred. That night, Nathan sat at his desk. Orion curled at his feet. He pulled up the school security log on his laptop and skimmed through it. Then opened a private folder on his desktop labeled Observation Notes. Not official reports. Just instincts. He added a new entry. Date: Monday, November 6. Subject: Lily Hart. Note: Recess. Observed unusual behavior from Orion. Approached Lily independently. Sat beside her unprompted. Lily smiled. First recorded instance. Avoided all other students. Maintained full proximity to Orion for remainder of break. Follow-up needed. He looked down at Orion. The dog was awake. Watching. Over the next few days. The pattern continued. Each morning, as the recess bell rang, Orion would lift himself and trot out across the playground, always to Lily. Sometimes she was on the bench. Sometimes by the fence. Wherever she sat, he found her, and stayed. She never reached to pet him. But she always smiled. On Wednesday, something changed. A soccer ball bounced out of bounds and landed near Lily and Orion. A boy from another class jogged over, grinning, trying to retrieve it. "Hey, can you?" Before he could finish, Orion stood up. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just stood, positioned himself slightly between Lily and the ball. Eyes locked on the boy. The kid paused, raised both hands. "All good, no problem," and backed away. Nathan saw it from across the yard. He made a note. By Friday, the other students had stopped trying to engage Lily. They called her "dog girl" behind her back. She didn't respond. She didn't seem to care. But Orion stayed close. When a gust of wind scattered leaves across the yard, she pointed quietly and whispered something to him. He followed her finger. Nathan caught it, a faint laugh. The kind that sounded like it had been forgotten. At dismissal that afternoon, Nathan stood near the curb as parents and guardians arrived. A blue truck pulled up, older model. Dented fender. Raymond Hart stepped out. Heavy set. Weathered. Too clean. A blankness behind his eyes. He opened the passenger door. Lily hesitated. Orion didn't move. Nathan watched carefully as Lily stepped into the truck. Raymond glanced up, met Nathan's eyes just for a second. Then closed the door. That night, Nathan sat in silence for a long time. He didn't have proof of anything. Just a feeling. And a dog who trusted his nose more than most people trusted facts. He reached for his notebook again. Raymond Hart. Guardian. No known priors. But gut says watch closely. Orion reacting like he did in field, protective. Quiet. Focused. He senses something. I'm listening. Then he added a line he hadn't used in years. This isn't over. Northwood Elementary. Friday, 11:07 a.m. The gym buzzed with the restless energy of third graders packed shoulder to shoulder on the floor mats. Teachers lined the walls, trying to maintain order as Principal Farley adjusted the microphone and began listing off outstanding citizenship awards in his usual slow, serious cadence. Lieutenant Nathan Cole stood near the back of the gym. arms crossed, Orion at his side. The Belgian Malinois was calm, scanning the crowd with steady eyes. He always behaved well in assemblies, content to lie quietly at Nathan's feet or keep a watchful eye on the exits. But this time, something was different. Orion stood, ears locked forward. Then, he growled. Deep, low, rising. Nathan's eyes followed the dog's gaze, cutting through the sea of heads and clapping hands to the side hallway that connected the gym to the dormitory wing, where a delivery man in a brown uniform had just pushed through the doors. And Orion bolted. The growl turned to a sharp bark as Orion lunged forward, the leash slipping from Nathan's hand for the first time in years. The dog tore across the edge of the gym, cutting past startled teachers and scattering a group of fifth graders. The delivery man stopped mid-stride. His box dropped. His eyes widened as Orion skidded to a halt in front of him. Barking ferociously, Nathan was already on the move, radioing the office with one hand, the other reaching for his ID. "Back up," he ordered, stepping in between them. "Turn around. Hands where I can see them." The man hesitated. I have a package." "For who?" he fumbled. "Room 12. For Mrs. Kelman." "There's no room 12 in the dorm wing," Nathan snapped. The man went pale. "ID, now." The badge he produced was a cheap laminate card. The company name didn't match the box logo, and the name didn't match the registry at the front office. Nathan stared hard at him. "You want to tell me why you're walking toward a restricted area without proper clearance?" The man opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, a security officer arrived from the office. 2 minutes later, he was being escorted off the premises, pending further investigation. Nathan didn't take his eyes off him until the doors closed. Then he looked at Orion. The dog's body was still tense, teeth bared, but the growl had stopped. And for the first time in Nathan's career, he wasn't sure if the dog had just sensed a threat, or known exactly what it was. Principal Farley tried to smooth over the incident during the remainder of the assembly, calling it a minor misunderstanding, and thanking our security team and our vigilant K-9 officer for ensuring everyone's safety. But the tension lingered long after the applause. Back in the nurse's office, the room was quieter. Lily Hart sat on the padded cot, legs swinging slightly above the floor. Her arms were wrapped around her backpack like a shield. She hadn't spoken since the assembly ended. She hadn't cried, either, but she wouldn't let anyone else near her. Except Orion. He sat beside her, head resting against her leg. She had her fingers threaded into his collar, not gripping, just holding. Maya, the school nurse, gestured Nathan into the hallway. "She's not talking," she whispered, "but she wouldn't leave without the dog. I think she's scared." Nathan nodded. "Let me try." He stepped inside, crouched beside her. "Hey." She didn't look up. "I think Orion scared a lot of people today," he said, keeping his tone easy. "But you weren't scared, were you?" She shook her head. "Because he wasn't trying to scare you," Nathan continued. "He was trying to protect you." A long pause. Then Lily slowly pulled something from her backpack. A folded piece of lined paper. crumpled, faint pencil markings. She tucked it into Orion's vest, right where she had before. Nathan reached out gently and took it. The note read, "He's not really my uncle. Don't let him take me back." Nathan stared at the words. Not neat, not perfect, but deliberate. This wasn't impulsive. This had been building. He sat on the floor next to her, hands resting on his knees. "Lily," he said gently, "I believe you." Her eyes finally met his. "I'm not going to let anyone take you back to somewhere unsafe. Do you understand?" She hesitated, then nodded. By late afternoon, Child Protective Services was on site. Nathan handed over the note personally, along with the fake ID and a written statement about the encounter with the impersonator. Raymond Hart never came to pick Lily up that day. He didn't answer his phone, didn't respond to emails. By 7 p.m., he was officially listed as under investigation for custodial fraud and child endangerment. By 7:30, Lily was in temporary protective care. But not before she asked one question. "Can Orion come with me?" Nathan smiled. "He'll visit, as often as you want." And as he watched her leave with the CPS worker, her backpack still hugged to her chest, her eyes no longer blank but watchful, he felt a weight settle into place. He looked at Orion. "You knew." Orion blinked, then lay down. Mission complete. For now. Northwood Elementary, Saturday, 8:45 a.m. Lieutenant Nathan Cole stood in front of the old staff records room at the back of Northwood's administrative building. Sunlight casting slanted shadows through the blinds. The district's HR clerk had unlocked the file cabinet and stepped out for coffee. Nathan was alone now, flipping through paperwork with growing unease. Raymond Hart was a name that showed up only 4 months ago, on Lily's transfer documents as her legal guardian and emergency contact. But something had always felt off. Too neat, too shallow. Nathan dug deeper. Background checks, county records, archived school security footage. Then, a breakthrough. 3 aliases, all tied to temporary roles at youth organizations, summer camps, shelters, and each of them ended with complaints of boundary violations, inappropriate conduct, or sudden departures right before formal investigations began. No convictions, no direct accusations, just quiet disappearances, like smoke through cracks. He emailed the findings to CPS and returned to his desk, where a forensic toxicology report was waiting. Subject: Lily Hart, alias confirmed, unknown. Result: positive for low-level benzodiazepine traces. Estimated timeline of prolonged exposure: 8 to 10 weeks. Administered in subclinical doses, likely through food or drink. Nathan sat back in his chair. Sedation. That explained everything. The sluggishness. The blank stares. The way Lily had never spoken until recently. It wasn't just trauma. It was chemical silence. Later that afternoon, while walking the perimeter of the school grounds, Orion suddenly froze at the far end of the field, just before the tree line that bordered the back fence. Nathan followed his line of sight. A shed. It was old, faded wood, half-collapsed roof, tucked behind a thick patch of pine. Technically school property, but well out of bounds. Orion began to bark, not the alarmed bark of a sudden threat, but the sharp, alert bark of discovery. The lock was old, but not rusty. Nathan radioed it in, then pried the door open with a crowbar. Inside, dust, stale air, and something more disturbing. A tarp-covered folding table. Softbox lights, cheap, portable, a fake white canvas backdrop, and a single stool. He stepped closer and spotted a set of battery-powered cameras hidden in the corners. USB drives. A clipboard with first names and check marks. No signs of direct violence. No beds. No restraints. But this wasn't a forgotten storage shed. It was a set. For someone's show. By the time the forensics team arrived, Nathan had bagged the drives and sent him to the lab. CPS officers escorted 2 other girls from the community who had appeared in the logbook, both of whom claimed they were interviewed by Raymond for a children's charity project that didn't exist. The cameras had captured hours of staged interviews. Girls aged 6 to 10, seated in front of the backdrop, directed to answer personal questions and try on clothes provided in plastic bins. Nothing overtly criminal was recorded, no abuse, no nudity, but the coercion was undeniable. The setup, the lies, the way Raymond had used his charm, his fake identity, and the trust of a quiet girl to build a pipeline of exploitation. Just below the surface of a sleepy town. And it had gone unnoticed. Until Orion growled. Until Lily wrote a note. Until silence cracked. Nathan sat with Lily at the CPS center that evening. The sun was setting outside, streaking the windows with faint orange. She was curled in a blanket on the couch. Orion curled at her feet. She hadn't said much since being told the truth, that Raymond was not her legal guardian, that he had no custody rights, that he was being held under federal charges pending further investigation. But she did say one thing. "My name's not Lily." Nathan looked at her gently. "Would you like to tell us what it is?" She nodded, then whispered, "It's Ava." A pause. From before. They found her real name on a missing persons report filed 2 years earlier in another state. Ava Lee Monroe. Age 6 at the time of disappearance. Mother deceased. Placed briefly in foster care. Then vanished from the system. They cross-checked the photo. It was her. No doubt. The silence finally had a name. That night, Nathan updated his observation log for the last time. Saturday, November 11. Orion led officers to hidden shed behind school perimeter. Camera equipment. Set design. Interview records. No overt abuse on film. But pattern of psychological manipulation confirmed. Raymond Hart held under 3 aliases. Multiple suspicious exits from previous institutions. Subject identified as Ava Lee Monroe. Missing child since 2021. Biological identity confirmed. Drug traces consistent with long-term sedation. Orion's behavioral detection was primary breakthrough in investigation. He sat back, then added a final note. The girl didn't say much. But when she did, she said exactly what needed to be heard. Northwood. 2 weeks later, it started as a local news segment. A former military K-9 helped school officials uncover a false guardian and rescue a missing child. But within days, it became something more. By the end of the week, every national outlet had picked up the story. The Smiling Stranger case, headlined across screens and homepages, the name drawn from the way Raymond Hart appeared in community photos, grinning, arms crossed in volunteer T-shirts, handing out flyers about helping vulnerable children. A man who had worked himself into 3 communities in 5 years. Under 3 different names. Always in the orbit of schools, youth charities, or wellness groups. He hadn't hurt anyone in the traditional sense. Not on record. But he'd quietly bent trust until it broke. Until Ava Lee Monroe, once called Lily, wrote 4 words and handed them to a dog. Ava's story didn't just shock people. It unsettled them. Because it wasn't about someone hiding in the dark. It was about someone who smiled at carpool, thanked teachers, and showed up early to clean up after school events. It was about how trust could be dressed up and walked through the front door. But what truly haunted people was what the police uncovered after the shed. Archived forums, encrypted drives, dozens of interviews never meant to be shared. Enough patterns to suggest that Northwood had not been the beginning. Just the first time anyone noticed. The town of Northwood responded the way some small towns do, at first. With embarrassment, shame, then fear. But something shifted when Ava's story was shared. Carefully and with consent. Through a letter her caseworker read aloud at a town council meeting. I didn't think anyone could hear me. I thought quiet meant no one cared. But Orion sat next to me. He didn't need words. He just stayed. And because he stayed, I stopped feeling invisible. Ava Lee Monroe, age 8. That letter broke something open. 2 students came forward the next day. One was a boy from grade 4, who said he'd once been told by Mr. Ray not to tell anyone about a private interview, and that he only felt calm again when Orion visited his classroom during a storm drill. Another was a 5th-grade girl who confessed that she'd been too afraid to speak up about an incident at a youth center, because Mr. Ray smiled so much it made it feel normal. She remembered crying behind the library shelves once, and Orion finding her and sitting beside her until she could breathe again. Neither had been formally groomed. No physical harm had occurred. But both children remembered one thing clearly. They didn't feel safe until the dog showed up. Principal Farley, shaken and visibly emotional, took the stage during the school's emergency town meeting that weekend. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "This is about awakening. We didn't miss a criminal. We missed the quiet. We missed the shadows. And now we owe it to our students to never look away again." He paused, then announced a new initiative. The Northwood Resilience Program, a trauma-informed care system, staffed by school counselors, peer advocates, therapy animals, and a standing partnership with CPS and local police. Designed not just to react, but to listen. But the biggest change came with what they did to the old campus reading room. It had always been a dusty space tucked between the library and the art hallway. Forgotten, underused. On the first Monday of December, They reopened it under a new name. Painted in warm letters above the door. The Orion Room, where silence is heard. Inside were beanbags, books about courage, healing, and animals, a wall painted with silhouettes of pine trees, and a mural of a Belgian Malinois lying beneath them. Ears up, eyes soft. The room wasn't a place for loud conversation. It was a space for presence. A place where students could go when they didn't have the words. Because, as the plaque said near the window, some stories aren't shouted, they sit beside you, and wait until you're ready. Ava visited the room privately, 1 week before winter break. She sat with her new teacher and her caseworker. Her legs were stronger now. Her hair had grown longer. She didn't flinch when adults entered the room. Orion sat beside her, as always. She ran her fingers gently along his collar and whispered something to him. No one heard it. But that was okay. She wasn't whispering to be understood. She was whispering because she could. That night, Nathan Cole stood in the doorway of the room long after the building had emptied. Orion stood beside him, his coat catching the light from the mural. The room was quiet, but not empty. "I think you did more than any of us," Nathan murmured. Orion gave no sound. But he didn't need to. Some heroes don't wear badges or boots. Some just sit beside you. And stay. Northwood Community Center. End-of-year ceremony. The auditorium was packed. Parents filled every chair. Teachers stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles. And students whispered with excitement as music hummed faintly through the overhead speakers. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting soft golden beams on the blue velvet curtains that framed the stage. At the edge of the platform sat a low wooden pedestal draped in a navy cloth, bearing a gold-trimmed plaque. National Medal of Child Protection, awarded to K9 Orion, for unyielding vigilance, courage in silence, and loyalty without words. The medal itself, silver and bronze, shaped like a shield, hung from a deep green ribbon. Engraved at the base were 4 words. He heard the unspoken. Lieutenant Nathan Cole stood just off stage. His uniform pressed, expression tight with emotion. Orion, sitting tall at his side, wore no formal vest today, just his usual collar, freshly brushed, a small bow tied neatly around it by one of the second graders. He didn't fidget, he didn't bark. He simply waited, the way he always did. It had been 6 months since everything changed. Ava Lee Monroe, once known as Lily, was now officially Ava Lee Rivera. Adopted by Ms. Rivera, Northwood's gentle, bright-eyed art teacher. The paperwork had finalized in spring. But the relationship had started long before, with open studio time, gentle encouragement, and the offer of a quiet corner to paint. Now, Ava painted boldly, and today, she would speak boldly too. Principal Farley approached the podium and cleared his throat. "We gather today not just to celebrate the end of another school year," he said, voice steady, "but to recognize a story that reminded us what school is really for. Not grades. Not routines. But safety, trust, and healing." He gestured toward the front row. "To honor that story, I'd like to invite a very special student to the stage." There was a brief hush as Ava stood. No wheelchair. No hesitation. Just her small frame, dressed in a soft yellow dress. Walking confidently to the microphone, Orion at her side. Each step in sync. She stopped center stage. The silence grew full. And then she spoke. "When I first came here," Ava said, voice clear, "I didn't know how to speak anymore. Not really." She looked out across the room, at Ms. Rivera, at Nathan, at the classmates who once called her Dog Girl and now called her friend. "I was scared of everyone. I thought being quiet was the only way to stay safe. I thought if I stayed invisible, I'd stay okay." A breath. "But Orion didn't let me stay invisible." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with strength being sharpened as it rose. "If Orion hadn't growled that day, I'd still be silent." A few gasps broke the hush. A parent wiped their eyes. A teacher clutched their chest. Ava continued. "He didn't speak, he didn't shout, he didn't ask questions." She turned and placed a hand gently on Orion's head. "He just growled. And that growl meant someone saw me. Someone knew something was wrong. Even when I couldn't say it." She smiled, eyes glistening. "And because of him, I'm not scared anymore." The applause began softly, then swelled, standing, sustained. It wasn't just for Ava. It was for every child who had ever swallowed their voice. And for the dog who had told the truth before anyone else did. Nathan stepped forward and knelt beside Orion as Ava gently lifted the medal and placed it over his head. The moment his name was called, Officer Orion, K9, retired, the crowd erupted again. Louder now. No parade, no sirens. Just the sound of a town waking up and saying, "We hear you now." Later that night, as the sun dipped behind the pine trees and families trickled into the warm summer dusk, Ava sat beneath the big oak on the school lawn, her hand resting lightly on Orion's back. "You didn't bark," she said softly. Orion looked up at her, eyes calm. "You didn't have to." She leaned her head against him. "Because you already said everything. When no one else would. The story would live on. Not in headlines. Not just in law enforcement journals or child advocacy posters. But in every school counselor who paid closer attention. In every teacher who learned to listen between the lines. In every student who no longer thought silence meant safety. The town had changed. Because of a growl. Because of a girl. Because when no one else spoke, they found a way back together."
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.